Hello, folks. Brendan Chapman with you. It's a Monday video for TheoTRADE. It is November 20th, 2023. We're leading up to a holiday shortened week with the market being closed on Thursday due to the Thanksgiving holiday, and then a shortened Friday trading session. And so this is kind of the kind of time period where you tend to see volumes begin to dry up. But that being said, is that we're still in the mode where we have earnings, and especially NVDA that we'll kind of talk about today, which was up another 2.25%, that has earnings tomorrow after the market close. Now, if you thought NVIDIA was a story today, it was not. It was really, in fact, the bond market. So if we look at /ZB, the move today in equities was heightened in terms of the upside move after a very solid bond auction, the results of which report around 11 a.m. my time. But anyway, nice breakout here to a new level in ZB. If we look at /ES, you'll see markets were lifted around the same time as yields pushed lower, equities pushed higher, and lifted the market generally. As we look at the top performing sector today, XLK with communications, real estate, there's the S&P at 0.77. Cyclical is kind of lagging just a little bit, but the two are dragging bottom are utilities and staples. And this is really kind of that first indication that we've had for a while that ultimately this is much more of a risk on dynamic. When you look at SPHB as an example, SPHB takes the top 100 most volatile stocks in the S&P 500 and invests in them. And NVIDIA is the second largest holding, which means it's one of the top 100, if not the second most volatile stock in the S&P 100, just behind, I believe, CCL in that mix. But again, up 0.93%. If we look at the holdings within that fund, so we're going to bring up SPHB top holdings. Notice the 1 week performance here. So we'll go back 1 week, 16% for Para, CCL, Solar Edge up 13%, even though the trend's not as strong here. But Generac, you're seeing the squeeze go on across the board here. And the laggard amongst all of them is NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA had a really fast start, but the last week it's kind of slowed up until we see the earnings coming up tomorrow. The 3 week performance here, again, SPY is the third worst performing. Again, just showing that the fact is that when you see the market move higher, these high beta names are typically an area where you see rotation. Many of these stocks do have higher short interest, for example, as well, like a CCL in the mix, Caesars, I believe, as well. But again, you'll see that these stocks typically perform as SPHB begins to outperform. And I usually draw a ratio of SPHB to SPLV. We look at this every Friday. And I've been talking about the breakout here for over a week now and looking at these kind of names as areas for strong performance. This is something I shared at our retreat that we had almost about a week and a half ago. And again, this is kind of this signal that I look for as a time to rotate towards these names. And that's exactly kind of what's happened. Again, NVIDIA now has the opportunity to play catch up a little bit if the earnings come out. Now, here's the deal, though. Bond market certainly helping spur the market on, but NVIDIA is a very big holding in many funds. So I talked about SPHB, but for the Qs, NVIDIA is 4.57%. XLK, the Technology Spider Select Sector ETF, 4.59%. And in SMH, the Semiconductor ETF that relates to the SOX index, is 19.96%. So the fact of the matter is, and this is why I talked about it 2 weeks ago in my video, is that as NVIDIA goes, so goes the market. And I think as we look at the performance here, especially in the last week, generally speaking, I think this is shown to be true. Now, NVIDIA with its breakout today certainly helping, being spurred by general market buying because it's one of its largest holdings. However, the earnings could create an interesting scenario. If we go back on NVIDIA, go back 10 years as an example, right? We peaked back here in late 2021. We peaked back here in October of 2018. Both into the peaks, we talked to the theme at the time was that we had some shortage of semiconductors. And I remember in 2021 talking about the potential that NVIDIA could test 100, okay? And you're like, oh, no way. But they got a downgrade. There was an indication there was a bit of an oversupply in some of their consumer business. Back in 2018, they finally jumped into the ASIC space, crypto mining, after being reluctant for a long time. But everyone's talking about the chip shortage that existed. And all of a sudden, that began to erode, and the stock went from a peak here of about 73 down to about 30. If NVIDIA starts to unwind here, it would not be unreasonable to see this stock at 250 again. Could it go to 100? Absolutely it can, right? This is one of the most volatile stocks in the S&P 500. It's in the top 100 companies, but it's the second biggest holding in SPHB. So the reality is, again, we've made a very large move in the last few weeks here. 3 weeks, it's up 22%. So guess what happens? Oftentimes in these scenarios, if the earnings comes out positive, frequently what you'll see is the upside move may be more muted relative to the downside move. If for some reason, and it's probably not the odds-on bet here, but if NVIDIA misses, could we see a gap down to $400 again? That'd be that's a 25% increase we see here. Could we see a 20% decline after a big earnings miss? Absolutely, that's possible. Not likely, but possible. But even an earnings surprise does not typically yield, after a big move like this, does not typically yield as much of an upside. And so right now we're going into an earnings announcement that's probably relatively skewed to the downside because of the big run up here, right? Everyone buying in anticipation that the earnings are going to come in better than expected. And we'll see whether they can deliver. And this is going to be a big deal. You'll notice the last earnings here yielded what? Kind of gapped and then sold off. Could we see just some selling here if we just come out in line, buy the rumor, sell the news, or do we see a massive sell-off here? And this causes some issues, right? Some potential uncertainty on a week where typically we just kind of bleed higher, right? We typically just see the market grind to the upside on stock buybacks, etc. But right now we are seeing the potential for a squeeze amongst high short interest stocks, and obviously the move that may happen in NVIDIA, the bond markets finding some buyers here, helping quell some of the fears. But one thing we've seen here in the most recent run-up, 4 different trades in SPY, that was well over 1 million shares, 1 million shares plus. This is highly unusual. Even in October 23rd, back here, there was a significant print, 1.2 million shares. This level around 450, 451 provides an area of support for the market. If we break this, we look back to the next level here, right? Break that, we're looking at a next level and the next level and the next level on the way down. But the idea of this is saying, look, if we go back, let's go back 5 years. In 2021, we saw a tremendous amount of unusually large prints. We're talking about 1 million plus prints. And notice what happened here, late November into December. There was a significant number of large 1 million prints. And at the time, I kind of call this out saying, look, I don't care if they're buys or sells. We just know that these are significant prices and price levels and the number of shares being transacted. And my thought process at the time was we're seeing the strong hands likely selling to the weak. And once we saw things begin to turn, and my bearish forecast began on January 17th in this range, and my bullish forecast began early next year, at the end, and we began to get bullish on NVIDIA, on AMD, on January 9th. If you went back to this video, you'd see our discussion on AMD and NVIDIA that day, and we set some targets for those stocks. Those have all been met and well beyond, and so are we at a different point this time versus maybe end of next year? As we look at the VIX is a lot lower today than we were back at the beginning of December, early January. We look at SKU. SKU is a lot higher today than it was at the end of December, right? We look at the 3-month to 1-month VIX. This ratio, oops, forgot an I in there. We did kind of break out here. We're still not above 1.2. The idea is that there's still probably room for the VIX to fall and the 3-month to stretch its relationship to the 1 month to get 20% higher. So if we had a nice update tomorrow, we could see that this might push above 1.2, starting to get that trigger to start to look bearish with again, skewing more bearish with a high skew and high back month volatility if we can see something similar to August, September. Again, we didn't get that this year until late March, mid-April. And so we look at the SPY here. April was kind of this time frame, but then we got the breakout. Again, you'll notice right here as an example, we may, with a push towards 460 on the SPY, 4,600 on the S&P, we might push to that level and start to look for a pullback in the market of 5 to 10% in the coming weeks. So we'll see if that triggers tomorrow. But again, there's lots of stuff. NVIDIA tomorrow after the close could create some big movement on a holiday shortened week where volume should lighten up going into the end of the week, which typically favors stocks. Companies buy back shares, et cetera, and that generally lifts equities. And if the bond market continues to see a little bit of bullish pressure, yields dropping, that's going to help lift stuff. Okay. Now, lifting stuff, could that be some high short interest names like a Palantir, for example? Well, it's already been lifted, but this could continue to move, right? We're talking about a short squeeze and a gamma squeeze combined. The activity in Palantir today was a 24 no of 2150, which is today's high. Starts to take out the level. It might create a little bit of a squeeze to the upside. If we look at Mara, so Bitcoin ETFs did well today. For Mara, it was a 24 no of 1050 strike. That's where we finish. As we break through this, again, it could create more bullish pressure. There was a bullish interest on last Tuesday in Mara. I took an upside spread in Mara at the 1050, 1250. So I'm just barely pushing in the money here, but I'm looking at this pushing towards 1250, maybe $14, which if we get a short squeeze, a la June, it could happen, right? Riot, similar phenomenon, breakout today. This is a 1D14, kind of gives you that upside target here for next week's expiration. As we look at SOFI, I put on a spread in SOFI today, just taking that upside swing if we see a squeeze. Notice this kind of lagged a little bit till mid-May, and then we broke out and saw a significant move. And SOFI's got some decent short interest. We're at support, very similar like we saw back here, bearishly skewed. And again, if we get that short squeeze, pretty cheap spread on this one, 7,850, cost you 30-something cents with a $1.50 of upside and $1.20. It's about a 4-to-1, 3.5-to-1 ratio if we can get to 850. And for me, I like kind of this December expiration. Give me a little bit more time for it to happen. The 7's about 42 cents. The 8.5's at about 10 cents here. So my cost you 32 cents. And notice the skew. We're buying 63 and selling 66. That is favorable. And that's the great thing with many of these high short interest stocks. The skew is favorable. Like Mara, again, as well. Same scenario. CCJ. Uranium companies continue to churn here. 29D's 50 in this one here. Buying the 50s. URNM as well. So uranium continues to see bullish pressure. This is a D's 54 up here. So again, we're looking for this continued grind to the upside in uranium stocks based on the unusual option activity. And AI in the news today. So again, AI in the news. AI ChatGPT in the news. Microsoft, kind of making the big play there. But AI is a high short interest stock that had some bullish option activity. Did not break out, did not finish. It failed throughout the course of the day. But AI was at 24 no of 31. So we start to get up here, break 31. We could see an upside squeeze. So just watch these names. You could wait for the move to begin to happen. IQ is one we were looking at last week, did kind of peel back. We kind of bounced today. Earnings are coming up here. This could be a driver, but again, high short interest stock that I talked about last week in my session that has high short interest. Finally, we'll look at NKLA. So again, we're just looking at this week and saying, look, are there some fun trades to the upside that could see big moves on a holiday shortened week, some lack of liquidity? We could see a big push and a short squeeze. Nikola Motors, Nikola Corp as well. Nikola, it was the 24 no $1 strike price. So right here at the money. And as you look at this, we're seeing about 32,000 contracts traded, mostly bought at the $1 strike. So we have this gamma level. If we can break through one, this may engineer a squeeze higher, gamma squeeze, that may parlay into a short squeeze. And this is what happened back here in June and then again in July. Again, we saw option activity during both of these squeezes back here that led out before the move. So again, this might be a similar scenario, similar to SOFI. Again, this might create an interesting trade in the next week or two if the market continues to grind higher and we see the dominoes of short squeezes start to take hold in companies like a SOFI and companies like a NKLA and others, and maybe a continuation of stocks like PLTR and Mara, et cetera. Well, folks, that's what we got on the docket for today. Again, watch the bond market, watch NVIDIA earnings tomorrow. Those could create big, big moves for the week. And look for some of these opportunities in some of these high short interest stocks that may help kind of lead out. And many of these higher beta names, they may see continued squeezes higher as well as the high beta names and the high short interest names probably lead the market quite significantly if the market continues to test new highs. And we have a great one. We'll see you back next week. Thank you.